Now, we are here today to talk about plant physiology. One sec. We are here today to talk about plant physiology. Under that heading, we're going to look at plant tissues, photosynthesis, respiration, transpiration, and nutrition. So pretty much everything that goes on in the plant. Today, we're going to focus on just the first two, just to get us up and running. They are plant tissues and a little on photosynthesis. The structure of the class, I'm just going to run through some slides on these first of all, and then I will set you some homework, which is just to read through this in the book and do some questions. If you want to ask any questions at any time, there is a raise hands icon, and if you hit that, it should show up here on the chat for me. Right, so let's get started then. Plants have three different types of tissue, but the tissue that we're going to focus on is the vascular tissue. Now, vascular, you may know from any of you doing biology, means transport tissue. And there are two main types that we're going to look at of transport tissue in the plant, which you might remember from junior cert. They are the xylem and the phloem. Now, here's what they look like in a kind of a simplified version. So the xylem, first of all, has two different types of cells in it. It has the ones on the left here, which are called xylem elements, and the ones on the right that are called tracheids. Now, they have some subtle differences between them. Overall, the xylem is a dead tissue, meaning there's no nucleus to be seen in any of the cells inside in the xylem. And it has a particular carbohydrate in it called lignin that makes it nice and strong, and that's what allows plants to transport water all the way up to the top of very tall plants. So here we have a xylem vessel, first of all, and you can see that just looks like a continuous tube, and that's because it was made up of lots of different cells, but the end walls of those cells have kind of broken down to make up that tube. If you contrast that here with the tracheid actually has little end walls on its cells, but those little end walls have things that look kind of like a filter on them, and so they can filter the water as it goes through it. The tracheids there as well, you can see little pits in it, and a pit is like a side channel where water can go from one tracheid into a neighbouring tracheid. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the tracheid and the xylem vessel. Okay, then what about the phloem then? So phloem is the other tissue, and it transports food in the plant. Now, it usually transports that food in the form of a simple sugar. And here is a picture of the phloem. And you can see, again, it's made up of two different cell types. So there's this little cell over here on the right. This is a cell here, and it's joined onto another cell, and it's joined onto another cell. And all of those cells together make what's called the phloem sieve tube. And the sugary liquid goes through this sieve tube. But it also has little companion cells, they're called, which are small cells here with a nucleus in each of them. And that's why the phloem is a living tissue, because it has those proper cells with nuclei. Now, what does the phloem do? Just to recap, it transports sugars. Now, those sugars are made in a process called photosynthesis, and the plant uses them for energy. Now, the main sugar that plant needs is glucose for photosynthesis, but that would be kind of overlapping into the biology there. So all you need to know is when a plant does photosynthesis, it makes a sugar, and that sugar is transported to all the different parts of the plant through the phloem. And now we're going to look at, sorry, before I go on to that, has anyone got any questions? Just give a little check. No. The next thing we're going to talk about then is photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is how plants make their food. Plants are what's called autotrophs, which means they're able to make their own food. We can't make our own food. We're called heterotrophs, but you don't need to know that. Now, how do plants make their own food? I'm sure you've come across the word photosynthesis before. Plants use sunlight, or more particularly the energy of that sunlight, and they absorb that sunlight energy, and they have a special pigment in them called chlorophyll, excuse me. And that chlorophyll inside is a green pigment, and it absorbs the sunlight energy. And then that energy is used to combine water that's after coming up from the roots of the plants all the way up through the xylem that we looked at in the last slide and up to the leaf, and also some carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide actually just goes into the leaf by a simple process that's called diffusion, which is where a gas moves from where there's relatively high amounts of it into a place where there isn't that much of it. So it diffuses naturally in through the pores in the leaf that are called stomata. Those are the openings in the leaf. So that carbon dioxide joins up with the water, and you make food from it. You make that simple sugar that we talked about in photosynthesis. Now, the plant does create some waste products from this, and one of the main ones that we're really interested in is this oxygen, because that is what we breathe. Okay, so how does this actually happen? Well, it all happens in the leaf, as I said earlier, and there's a little picture of the ultrastructure of the leaf. So just again to recap on the overview, plants are autotrophic, that means they can make their own food. They have chlorophyll in them, which is a green pigment. That's what makes leaves look green. And that chlorophyll absorbs light energy from the sun. That energy then is used to combine hydrogen from the water with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that makes glucose and oxygen. Right, so then that brings us on to the structure of the leaf. So how is it adapted, or how is it special in order to allow it to do photosynthesis? Well, let's start at the top of the leaf here. The leaf has a thing up here called a cuticle, and that cuticle stops the leaf from losing too much water. Then if you move down to the next layer, it's called the epidermis, which is similar in name to the human, of course. And that epidermis is the outer layer of skin, if you like, on the leaf of the plant. Then we also have a thing called a lower epidermis down here at the bottom, because obviously your leaf is a flat structure. Right. You'll notice that on the lower epidermis here we have little gaps, and those gaps are called stomata, or the singular here is stoma. That's just an opening, and that opening allows gases to go in and out of the leaf. Might just ask a quick question there. You can put your hands up if you want to answer, just so that I can test if this works. What gas do we need to get into the plant so that we can do photosynthesis? Okay, so I can see a raised hand there, so we will go to you, Deirdre. Lovely. Now the other layers that are here, so the leaf we've covered so far, the outer layer called the cuticle, and then we've covered the epidermis, and that has a top layer called the upper epidermis and a lower layer called the lower epidermis, and then we have this little opening in it called the stoma. Well, now let's look at the thing that fills up the whole inside of the leaf, and you'll see that the whole inside of the leaf has this mesophyll, it's called, meso meaning middle. So up at the top of the mesophyll we have a thing called the palisade mesophyll, which comes from a word that means pillar or column. And then we have the spongy mesophyll, which is kind of these round cells here. But the main thing you can see in those is they have lots of those small little green circles, and those are chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are where photosynthesis happens. So when this leaf wants to make some food, it needs to get some carbon dioxide to go in from the air here. It needs to get some water up through the xylem, and sometimes you'll see this diagram drawn with a little xylem vessel in there. The water brings up the xylem brings up the water. And then inside in the chloroplasts in there, you have loads of that green pigment called chlorophyll to absorb the sunlight. So then you have the water, the carbon dioxide and the sunlight. All of those things put together will make your food for you. It'll make that simple sugar for the plant that's called glucose. and it'll also happen to make oxygen as a byproduct, and it'll send that oxygen back out through those openings called stomata. Now, here's a little picture of the chloroplast for you. So we're going back there to look at those tiny little circles that we have here. Those little circles are chloroplasts, but if you were to look at them in more depth, here's what they look like. They have an outer membrane on the outside and then a little inner membrane. They have some liquid in around some bundles of coins, they look like to me, and they're called the grana, and the little outer liquid here is called the stroma. I don't know if that's going to come up, to tell you the truth. And now onto the adaptations of the leaf for photosynthesis then. So there's 5 different adaptations listed here. So we start up with that palisade layer. If you remember, that was the top layer of the leaf, and it's packed with chloroplasts, and that means there's loads of chlorophyll in there to absorb sunlight. Then if you flick down to the bottom of the leaf, you'll see the stomata down there. Those are the holes, and there's loads of them on the bottom of the leaf to allow lots of carbon dioxide to come in. There are little guard cells on either side of those stomata that control the opening and closing. There's a nice waxy cuticle quite often on the top of the leaf, and that prevents just too much of the water going out of the leaf, because you need that water for photosynthesis. And then if we look at that middle layer called the mesophyll, it has little air spaces in there, and those air spaces help the gases to diffuse into the mesophyll for photosynthesis to happen in there. There's just a little picture of oxygen coming out of the stomata. You can see this is an underwater plant, and you can see the little bubbles of oxygen coming out through the stomata. Now, we're not going to go on to respiration, so I'm just going to leave that there, and I'm going to stop the screen share. And I'm also going to stop the recording. And now, the next thing I want to do is just give you your homework actually before I stop the recording. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to look at the questions 1 to 5, I believe it was. Yeah, questions 1 to 5, 11 and 12 at the end of this chapter. So this chapter starts at page 134 of your books. It's chapter 9, plant physiology, and those questions start on page 141. So again, that's question 1 to 5 and 11 and 12. And that should just cover what we've been working on so far. I'll look at those questions with you in this class next week, but I will be adding to them as we go on during the week. So what I hope to do is to have a live lesson every Tuesday, and then in the Thursday class, I'll just set some more work for you. So I'll do a recording of more of this PowerPoint, and then I'll set you some more questions, and I'll do the same next Monday, and then we'll do all those corrections on Tuesday and hopefully be fit to start something new after that. Okay, I hope we get more of you set up for the next day. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you this time next week.